Okay, people have had some time to fill in, so I guess we'll get started with the panel then. Welcome everybody to my panel on. Welcome to my panel on Worldview and Alterhumanity. So first a little overview of what we'll be seeing today. First, like a little introduction out of the way. Then we'll broadly discuss worldview, like the definition, aspects, and implementations, and go over with like little tidbits, little considerations regarding the alterhuman, well, worldview or the alterhuman condition. There is also a link to I've also posted like the slides as well as my notes in the panel questions chat. So if you're not seeing the slides at this point, you can get them there. Okay. So then we'll dive into like the Sylvari worldview and yeah, have a look at my kin type and how it influences my worldview. Hopefully we'll have time for some questions and answers. Please post all the questions you have in the panel questions channel. I most likely will not keep up with the chat during the presentation itself. Otherwise, I might get distracted and then we'll go on to tangents. And before you do it, I have to do a part 2 of this, and we don't want that. So we're just getting started. The introduction. My name is Naikiir, pronoun she, her, autistic trans woman. Though technically, while it says I'm a trans woman, that statement is a simplification, and we'll discover why at the part about the Sylvari. And for those who do not know what Sylvari are, we are plant people. There will be plenty more time to talk about that at the second part of the talk. So a little bit on what this panel is about. The goal is to give people the tools to dive deeper into themselves and come away with a better understanding. This is not intended to dictate what people should believe. And yeah, I'll basically try not to make any prescriptive statements. Everything is more intended to be like questions or like a little homework for you to take away with it. And lastly, since this talk will dig into like the very core of like beliefs, how we believe them and why we believe them, there is a chance that some of what I say might be controversial. If that is the case, deal with it. Okay, so worldview. So we'll first go over the definitions, then I need to include a disclaimer because everybody loves disclaimers. Then we'll talk a bit about origins, epistemology, presuppositions, and values, and finally look at how it like works together. Okay, so definitions. The definition I will be using here is a worldview is a cluster of interconnected values, interpretation, and facts that determines how someone evaluates the world, both natural and societal, around them. So let's dive a bit deeper into that definition. Interconnected cluster means that while it is composed of Well, it is composed of many parts. It still tends to function as like a whole. A little visual to help you imagine. Let's say you have like a bunch of cans, like tin cans, beer cans, soda cans. They're all like different sizes, different uh, thickness, different volumes. So these are all like the individual aspects. And, all of them together is your cluster. But like if you just have them and you line them up, then it's not really interconnected. However, once you start essentially building like a tower out of it, then they become interconnected. You will need to consider like the sizes and positions of all the different things, how they link together, and how you can make the tower stable. You might even need to squish some a bit to make sure that you can actually make a stable tower. And at the end, once you have your tower and you want to take one out, you better be fucking careful, because otherwise the entire tower will simply collapse. As for evaluate, I personally like to think of it a bit as like an operating system on a computer. It is kind of the software that allows you to run other softwares and bring it together in like a whole that functions. If anything I said about computers is wrong, deal with it. So lastly, worldviews. Most people think it like just means about like, how do you view society, but it does also encompass like the natural world. Like a worldview will like integrate like beliefs about like physics and about coffee and how you should best order coffee and which is the best kind of coffee, together with like chemical beliefs, all into one big blob. So for the alterhuman definition, it's essentially an umbrella term that wants to like include everybody, basically saying like, if you're not fully human in whatever way you consider it, welcome to the club. So next one is the little disclaimer. So first of all, here lies madness. You have no idea what I went through. Like, the thing is, since a worldview is kind of the software that you need to analyze the world, if you want to analyze the aspect of the world that is a worldview, you kind of need to like use your worldview to look at your worldview, and then things get circular and you go cuckoo bananas. So yeah, I will spare you from most of that. Also, everything I say will obviously be influenced by my worldview. Yes, it is turtles all the way down. Yep. And lastly, this isn't what I say here is not necessarily correct, not in the way that things are wrong necessarily, but rather there is no real objective standard. It's just people trying to categorize like a big wibbly wobbly mess of whatever. And like we have to like try to draw lines at which point it's wibbly wobbly and at what point it's just timey-wimey. And like there's no clear line, so anything we do is like arbitrary. So instead of like how accurate is this, it's more useful to ask how useful is it? So first part is origins. Like, where does somebody get their worldview? Mostly it comes from the society you grow up in. It's rarely like intentionally taught, so to speak, and it's more like acquired through osmosis. This means that like simply by living in a society, interacting with it, experiencing the rules and everything, you start to foment the same underlying ideas. An example, the fact that most of us start a day getting ready for work and that work is the main activity of the day instills in us the importance of work for us as individuals and also on a societal level. Of course, no individual is alike, neither in personality or experience, and as such, their worldview might differ a little bit, but they will often still have like the shared foundational beliefs. Now, worldviews aren't static. It's not like, oh, you were born with a worldview and then like you keep that until you die or once you have 18. Like our brains, our worldview is constantly developing and changing because we get new ideas. And these new ideas need to be integrated in some way. This can mean that either they are included, sometimes they like change a previous belief a bit so they can fit in. Think of it like denting a can so you can shove another can in your tower. And sometimes you just need to throw the new can away because it doesn't fit or you don't like it. It has the wrong color. So these ideas can come from different things. Some can simply come from the world changing around you. Like if we discover a new technology, that will lead to societal impact and that will influence the way we see the world. Like, the introduction of phones, specifically smartphones, that you have like, so much knowledge and connection at your fingertips all times of the day has like had a major impact on our world. You can, simply learning will also change. So as you're studying, you will develop your worldview, and coming into contact with others is very important. So one last part about this change is that there is often like an underlying ambiguity in all of it. Because we are not explicitly taught, we form an assumption based on how the society around us is. This means that, like, for example, the importance of work is not well defined because, like, we don't define how important it is or what counts as work necessarily. So you could change that a bit without necessarily changing your worldview. Okay. So, since worldview is largely derived from the society, this often raises a problem for people who fall outside of what a worldview accounts for. Because if your worldview is a way to analyze and understand the world, if they are not included, they cannot understand themselves. And you can see this, that many people have trouble accepting themselves when they are marginalized, until, of course, they find like a community to see themselves reflected in, to introduce these new ideas that allows them to make sense of themselves. And at that point, you can start to align your personal worldview with, the worldview that is put forward by this niche community. So that is one of the reasons why conventions like this are very important, because you get to interact with other people who see the world, maybe not exactly the way you do, but in a way that helps you understand yourself better. I hope I'm being a bit clear in what I'm explaining, because some of this is like pretty deep water matter, and I need to drink a bit of water before my throat gives out, sorry. Okay. So, epistemology is basically the fancy word for the study of knowledge, or the nature of knowledge. For our purpose, it can best be described as the question, how do we know things? Since a worldview contains many facts and values and observations and methods and so on, it needs a way to determine these, aka which ones should be included, which of them are true, which are useful, and which of them should be discarded. So this aspect is often so foundational to a worldview that it is one of the things that is hardest to question or even be aware of, that it exists. Like, of course, if you like diving into philosophy, you probably already are more aware of this. But yeah, this is where the madness lies most of all. But it is very important to acknowledge that the differences in epistemology can make worldviews very incompatible. It can be very, very hard to find common ground with people if you can't even decide on what finding means. Like we're not even getting to what common or what ground even means. We're getting stuck on the finding part, and that makes it a hell to deal with. So how do we actually know things? And while there are probably entire courses to be written about this, there are several methods, and most worldview incorporates like a mix and match of this. Like, we observe things, we rationalize, we get things from other people, and sometimes we just make shit up. So what is more important than, which method gets used by which worldview is which method gets used where. That is the important part. So, for example, in a certain religious worldview, the question of God is one that is maybe approached more to like listening to others or referring to like scripture or something, like not through investigation. While on the other hand, people who are atheists often do only accept like the observing and the direct investigation as like a valid way to answer this question. So the real disconnect between worldviews often happens when the method of knowing is different, as demonstrated by our little God example. So what does this mean for our community? Well, one of the biggest questions regarding how do we know things is knowing how do you know your own kin type? And from all the advice, all of these methods I mentioned are like, well, advocated at some point. Like, there is doing research, talking to others, cataloging your experiences, just thinking and meditating on them. And if all else fails, it's your life. You decide what's important and how you will go through it. And I think this is interesting because, like, in general, most people don't really consider epistemological questions, but we as a community are often like faced with like the limits of like the standard epistemology, so to speak. Like we have to not only try to figure out something, but we also have to figure out how we're going to figure it out. And I think that this is actually a good thing. To give a bit of a personal example, when I first realized I might be trans, I spent a lot of time like looking for proof, like looking for that one piece of evidence that would definitively tell me whether I was trans or not. It turns out this was the wrong approach, and only when I realized that I could move forward. When I realized that I could just define who I am and, you know, fuck everybody else. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't say this word. I should say the more controversial fish everybody else. Um, so when we are looking for this understanding, we might need to just try. We might need to try different things and see what actually works. And it can be difficult and frustrating at times, but I think it is also an enriching experience. And to be honest, my journey on my discovery of being trans helped me a lot with later discoveries, like discovering that I was otherkin, because it was simple. Oh, I know how to handle this. Fuck what you say. Oh, sorry. Fish what everybody else thinks. Okay, presupposition and foundational facts. They are technically not the same, but I'm grouping them together because it feels useful. It's also important to distinguish between like foundational facts and regular facts. For example, saying there is a plushie on my desk is fairly trivial and not worldview defining. Something like God exists, however, has huge implications and is not quite so trivial. Such facts, especially the presuppositions, often don't really have a justification or are built up from evidence. Like when people point to evidence for like their presupposition, that is usually evidence that they have concluded after the fact, after they have already accepted that. And okay, sorry, I need another sippy. Give me a moment. I need to refill my glass. Oh. So sometimes foundational facts can be very closely linked to a value and sometimes blur the line a bit. And I want to give like a little example to demonstrate this. I've often heard the statement, humans are inherently selfish, but often connected to that fact, that's fact in quotes, is often a value like we should all be selfish or ourselves. And in a sense, if you accept this value that you should be selfish and you act as such, you make the fact come true. And the reverse is the same. If you say like, fuck that, I'm not going to be selfish, then the statement humans are selfish becomes false. Well, maybe not humans are selfish because creatures And this is also a bit of a demonstration what I meant about the evidence regarding presupposition. Someone who holds that humans are inherently selfish can point to people doing selfish acts and say, see, I am right. And yet I can point to, hey, this person is acting selflessly. You are wrong. And this person can then go like, yeah, but this selfless act that is a bit more actually a selfish act because they feel good when they help others and basically like twist the evidence to support their belief essentially. So, or they could say like, yeah, humans are selfish by nature, but sometimes we can go against our nature. That doesn't disprove anything. And once you see these sorts of justifications, you often know that you are dealing with something that the other person considers a foundational fact for their worldview. We don't have any considerations, so we're going to skip right on to values. So values is the part that most people associate with worldview or think of. These are like the beliefs that dictate what is important and how the world should be. These are like the prescriptive aspects of a worldview. Like if you look into the literature, like people will like split them up in all sorts of things, but I just group them together because A, time, B, fish them. Um, so the values basically look at the world and try to build like hierarchies of importance. For example, what is more important in a person's life? Their career, their family, their church, their leisure time, or their other presentation? And if one of these conflicts with the other, which option should be chosen? Um, and since values are prescriptive, they also paint a picture of how the world should be. If you ask somebody um, what their perfect society would look like, you would uncover a lot of their values. Um, and technically, you could divide like values into many subcategories depending on what they deal with, such as morality, time, society, epistemology. The original version of this talk had like a lot more diving into them, but I only have 1 hour, and that took like 2 hours probably. If people are interested, I might do a panel on that in like one of the coming years. So here is like a little homework question. It's a very simple answer, but that means it's often difficult to answer. What is important for your kin type? Like, what do they value more than other things? And while everybody takes like a few minutes to wrestle with this, I'm going to drink another glass of water. And this is actually in my script. So, because this should be roughly the halfway point, and then I definitely need to drink some water. Okay. No, I'm going to drink a bit more. Mm-hmm. So as we've gone over these aspects, you might have noticed that it can be very hard where the line um, between these things should be. As all of these things build off of each other. And this leads to the final aspect, the interconnectedness. So none of this happens in a vacuum. Everything influences everything else. And sometimes these things influence in a way that you might not essentially or that you might not expect indirectly. So, for example, the values you hold can determine what epistemology you will accept. Your presuppositions can have influences over your values, as I've shown with the selfishness example. And you might even have thoughts or opinions on which sources you should allow to influence your own worldview. An example of this, our Western society might say that you shouldn't take your worldview from society, but instead make your own individual truth, which I think is not really how this works. But yeah, still they say it. They are like, oh, you shouldn't look to others for how you know things. So once you obviously start looking into all of this interconnectedness, the complexity of this entire system skyrockets, and yeah. And we haven't even gotten into how do we deal with contradictions and ambiguity. But I hope that at least by giving you like a little introduction, you know where you can start like picking at threads if you ever want to like untangle the knot of your own worldview. Now we get to my favorite part of the thingy, and this has not been like one big scam to trick you into listening to me ramble about Sylvari. I swear. So we'll delve into my kin type, the Sylvari, and its worldview and how I relate to it. So for those who don't know what Sylvari is, this is Audrey, one of the first designed Sylvaris. She's very pretty, and I wish I could hug her, but I can't, because I would knock over my monitor. So a little bit of what I look like as a Sylvari. So as mentioned before, the Sylvari are plant people. So we are a bit more of an approximation of the general human form, a bit like making a human figurine out of clay, but instead of clay, we're using like leaves and bark and stem and that sort of stuff. So we'll be covering two aspects. First, Sylvari reproduction, and then we'll look at the Sylvari's collective consciousness, the dream of dreams. You, sociality, and you. I just love the alliteration. So the Sylvari reproductive strategy, I maybe should have named this something else, is most in line with what we'd call eusociality in our world. An example of eusociality is ants. You have like a queen who lays eggs, and then you have workers who build the nest, find food, defend the colony, etc., etc. And then you have like the useless males whose only job is to just fertilize the queen. For Sylvari, there are some small differences. First of all, while an ant queen is similar to worker ants, the pale tree is significantly different from the Sylvari in that she is a tree. A sentient tree, but a tree nonetheless. The Sylvari then grow in pods on her branches, much like fruit grows and ripens, and there is no need for fertilization, so we don't need any men. Of course, this makes the pale tree extremely important in the worldview, because without a pale tree, the Sylvari would simply stop to exist. Worker plants, really? Okay, so this is the pale tree. Very pretty. Now you can stop staring at my mom. So let's go back to like the human society, or more specifically, like, Western European society I grew up in. So humans are a social species. While there is like some overlap that we both have multi-generational societies. I put that in the script. I knew I wouldn't be able to read that. And they care for each other's, for other people's pink little fleshlings and not just their own. However, the fact that reproduction is every human's responsibility, more or less, impacts a lot of values. Specifically, we see this with the focus that we put on family and biological offspring. While the view of family has definitely shifted more towards like companionship and not so much on reproduction, there is still a social expectation. Most notably, if you ask like how people expect their lives to go, there is a part of that that's still there. Like one of the steps in like how your life is expected to unfold in a human society is getting married and having kids. Now, this sense is nothing. Let me restart that sentence. Now, this sense has never been something that really clicked with me. While I understand this on like an intellectual level, a bit in the same way that I understand there is no gravity in space, but it feels so far removed from my own experience that I don't see how it would apply to me necessarily. Like a good example of this playing out was when I was going in for my gender affirming treatment and the issue of fertility came up. And when I say issue, I mean that the issue and concerns were completely one-sided on the side of the doctors who seemed surprised I didn't care about biological kids. So, because that is not an aspect, having kids, that means that for Sylvari, relationships and family, well, family isn't so much a thing, but like relationships are much more focused on like companionship and as something that is like optional. And this is definitely more how I feel. Part of that might be related to the fact that I'm like, aromantic and all of that stuff. But still. Okay. Next in eusociality, the construct of gender and sex. So for those who are not aware, gender most likely started out as the social expression of sex, but it has evolved beyond that over time. Now, since Sylvari don't have any reproductive organs, they don't have a sex, and as such, they also don't really need a gender. While there are some like, aesthetic differences between like what is labeled male and female Sylvari, that's basically just like as significant as like which foliage you have on your head. And this is also something I connect with very, very deeply. While I enjoy some of my female physical features, like my breasts, I don't really consider myself a woman. In fact, any attempt to look into gender just kind of leaves me baffled and confused. My aesthetic sense does seem to align a bit with what is considered feminine, and as such, it is fairly useful for me to just say to people like, I'm a woman, because having to explain this every time would take way too much time, obviously. But yeah, again, what a woman is another there is no gravity in space realization for me. Okay, how are we for time? Oof, I hope we have time for questions. Now, finally, the dream of dreams, the collective consciousness of the Sylvari. Ooh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it should maybe work. So, the collective, this dream is like made up of a combination of like memories, teachings, prophecies, and much more stuff that like a Sylvari has access to before they come into the world. Um, so we start our lives in essentially a personal dream. This is like a selection of memories and teachings and experiences that we will get. One comparison I've seen is like, oh, your soul exists before you're born, but I like to think of it more like a pre-birth guided meditation. In this comparison, the pale tree would be the one guiding us through the memories of the Sylvari and the visions of the world. Once we awaken, we maintain some connection with the dream. Most importantly, what we do, our memories, our experiences will become part of the dream in time. Not all of them, but part of them. And there is some amount of connection between Sylvari through the dream. And the last important aspect is that the dream provides us with purpose. I like to describe it as like a feeling of correctness, a bit like a special interest, something that like whispers to you and basically occupies your entire thought process is because this is the most important thing in the world. In more extreme cases, this can be like a wild hunt, which is like almost like a holy quest. So when it comes to the views on the dream among the Sylvari, there are three main philosophies. The dreamers are the dominant view and see the dream as a positive. They see it as something to bind society together and help everybody find their place in the world, and it's a fairly positive experience. The soundless value their individuality, and there is a mosquito here. So the soundless are very value their individuality, and as such, they try to disconnect themselves from the dream and other Sylvari to be themselves. And lastly, the nightmare court, who believe that the dream is misleading and incomplete, and they believe that negativity and pain should be a central part of the dream. And that the truth of life and the purpose of life is found through the suffering we endure rather than the happiness we experience. So here we can see that like while everybody has the safe fact of the dream exists, your values can definitely influence like how you look at these things. For myself, I consider myself to be a dreamer, though I can't deny that I sometimes feel like nightmare nibbling at my edges. Like the state of the world makes it often very hard to see like the good that exists, and I have endured a lot of pain, and it can be very hard not to start to see that as something that should define you. Um, okay. Oh, we're almost through. Now, let's compare this with the human world, and this might be a bit more of a rant, at least the first part. Since humans do not have a collective intelligence, they often put a lot more emphasis on individuality and construct their worldview from this assumption. Like, unlike the part about gender, where I have some freedom to live as I want, this option is not really available when it comes to being a member of what is, in essence, a bit of a hive mind. So in this world, I am alone without the guidance and inspiration from the dream and my fellow Sylvari, and this is often a hard thing to do. And on top of that, it can be very hard to find like understanding for this feeling, because humans put such a huge importance, so much value on individuality. And this can be seen in the fact that hive minds are often seen as like a pejorative, as like the villain in stories, in tales. It's the ultimate evil. So let's bring back in some epistemology with some foundational facts. So for humans, there is no one who can actually see inside themselves, as it were. This means that the best way of knowing who you are is by exploring and observing and analyzing yourself, and independently trying to construct oneself from such observations. So for Sylvari, this is different, as you know, people, or well, other Sylvari and the Pale Tree can see into us to some extent. And then is the question, if they can do that, why would we not accept their information when it comes to getting to know ourselves? This is a pretty fundamental disconnect between the two worldviews. For humans, thus a method of an outside force telling them who they are would be seen as like an imposition, because they can't really know them. And if you have to construct yourself, then that imposition is taking away your agency. But I do have some questions regarding that. Is this like really true? Because we say we construct ourselves, but which person chooses their own personality traits, chooses their own interests, chooses how they are raised, choose which worldview they actually have? Because for most of them, it's basically handed to them. So if you are not the source of what you are, then what is? And what if that source would be conscious in some ways and could tell you directly what you are? Would that be so bad? Or is it just that humans value their individuality more, as poorly defined as it is? And with that, we come to the end. Yay, we have like 8 minutes for questions. Thank you for your attention. Questions in the panel questions. I will go there now and start asking. Oh. Do, do, do. Let's see. Recorded. Amaraka. Amaraka, what is Sophont? For Willow, yes, as a Sylvari, I do consider myself a phytanthrope. The Pale Tree unfortunately cannot cuddle all her children at once. How does the nightmare court work? Um, that is an interesting question. Like, okay, to understand how the nightmare court works, we kind of have to go back to its origin. Technically, the nightmare court is composed of two factions who have shared interests. First of all, there are those who believe that Ventari's tablet, which I could not cover in this panel because time, is like a lie, and that Sylvari should choose their own path. On the other hand, are the more fanatical ones who, yeah, they feel that the dream is incomplete, like that the suffering is the important part. It's like, how to think about it. Not necessarily the suffering, but also the way to overcome it. Like if you would ask a person, oh, what was the most important event in your life? A dreamer might say something like, oh, it was like meeting my love and like sitting under the starlit sky and like talking to each other until like the sun rose. While a nightmare court member, oh, the most important part of my life was when I was captured. I was tortured for days and then I strangled my captors and fled. Like, they think that like the suffering is where you should start to build of who you are. Okay, so um so Amarakra, I'm trying to understand your question. Um I am unsure how people get to like mutually exclusive worldviews. I gave like some hints as to what can lie at the basis, but yeah, I don't have a good question for that. A good answer for that question. God damn it. She probably has a smell, Coraline. Uh, she probably has a smell, but I do not know. I'm not Shadow Cloud. Given your plant heritage, do you have a stronger sense of climate change in this world, or do you feel otherwise more strongly connected to nature in any way? I do value nature. I do not know what you mean, a stronger sense of climate change. However, I am very angry at climate change and very upset at the way we are treating nature. Like instead of living in harmony with it, we are like, yeah, subjugating it constantly. So regarding otherkinity, how does one truly know if the portion of oneself is non-human as opposed to human? Um, you can't really. And in that case, I want to be like go back to one of the first things I said in my disclaimer. Sometimes it's more important to see what is useful than what is correct. Like often these two will align, but sometimes you can't truly know the truth, in my opinion. And at that point, you need to look at what is useful, in my opinion. So, related as otherkin are creatures of myth, their stories and depictions are recorded by people who are luckily human in nature. As a result, how does one know their kin type is truly separate from humanity while still being an authentic... Oh, God, we're getting the deep questions. I should have expected this maybe with this panel, but still. Oh. I'm sorry, I can't think enough to answer that question. What is your favorite part of being a Sylvari? Um, which is the favorite part? I love my kin. Well, I haven't mentioned this in the slides. My kin are very both curious and good natured, and those are parts of myself I treasure so much, and I think that would be my um um like my most important or favorite part. Are there any more questions? Like, please do it quickly because technically, well, I think we're technically at the end. Yeah, I'm... Yes, why did you ask that? I don't know why you asked that. I can't answer that. My time is up for the panel. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you don't fall into existential despair. And, well, thank you all for coming and listening. And I hope you have a pleasant rest of the con. And I am now going to have to go to the toilet because I drank, like, half a liter of tea.